Welcome back to our Bible study of the book of Ruth. If you are joining us and you're not a member of St Andrew's congregation, you are most welcome. But this is really just the notes from the Bible study group, where there is a lot more discussion and lots of very interesting things. So in this session, we are going to look at chapter 1. So I'm going to read it as we go through it. Hopefully you've found Ruth by now, just after Judges, before 1 Samuel. So this is it, chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons or her husband. So I'm going to stop there. That's after verse 5. I'm reading from the NRSV. That is, in my opinion, the best Bible all round, I would say. But there are benefits of others as well, and it's always good to cross-examine different translations as you go along. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to draw attention to was the prepositions. As I've already said, this is one of only 2 books in the Old Testament who are named after women and in which women are the heroines. And it is noteworthy, I think, that the use of prepositions changes so rapidly in that first paragraph. We're first told that there was a man, Elimelech, and he had his wife and his 2 sons, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Now they die, and then we rapidly move to Naomi, and she was left with her 2 sons. You might expect that that would be the case because Elimelech dies. Maybe she becomes a centre of attention. But I think it is noteworthy, and it's quite rapid, that change. And it ends that paragraph with her husband. So Elimelech has become defined by who she is, Naomi, rather than the other way around. But either way, within one paragraph, we go from essentially 3 men with Naomi as a part player to 3 women, and the men have gone. So there's a rapid turnaround there. Also, I think, of course, the names are highly significant. We talked about this last week, but these would be dropping clues for us as ancient readers all the time. We would kind of have some idea maybe of where this story was going to lead or where we thought it was going to lead. So the first thing we would be surprised about, perhaps, is that the name Bethlehem, meaning house of bread, or sort of abundance, a granary or something, is quite the opposite at the moment. It is bereft of bread. There is a famine in those lands. And, of course, we're told straight away when the story is set, during the time of the Judges. So that's why it follows on very nicely from the book of Judges. Of course, we don't know necessarily from that when it was written, but it is a story from that time. So these people from the house of bread, from Bethlehem, which happens to have no bread, in Judah, and that's significant, possibly because there's other Bethlehems around and they want us to know which Bethlehem they're talking about, but possibly also because this story is specifically going to end up with significance for the house of Judah. They went to live in the country of Moab. Now that would be a huge surprise to us. Moab we talked about last week as somewhere that the Israelites very much looked down upon. Moab refused to give them water as they journeyed through the desert. Moab was born, or we are told, of the fruits of the incestuous love of Lot and his daughter. And generally, Moabite people are thought to have very, very low morals and all of that sort of thing. And the Moabite women are particularly dangerous and may end up sort of luring men into all kinds of mischief and that sort of thing. And then so we'll come back to Moab in a minute. But we have, of course, the name of the man who is initially the centre of the story, I suppose, Elimelech, meaning God is king, which could mean that this is someone with profound religious convictions. It could be more of a reference to the story and the meaning of the story, that God is sovereign and that things don't happen by chance, that God is working his purpose out through the story, even when it's not obvious. Or, of course, it may be a reference to where we're going to end up, that with a line of kings, with King David. So any of those sorts of things. Mahlon and Kilian, certainly meaning weak and sick. So we would expect them possibly not to do so well in the story. Actually, of course, we wouldn't expect any of them to do so well in the story because they are heading to Moab from Bethlehem. And the reason for that may be more clear if I read for you now Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, and then chapter 23, verses 3 to 6. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations mightier and more numerous than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them, and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, or taking their daughters for your sons, for that would turn away your children from following me, to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But this is how you must deal with them. Break down their altars, smash their pillars, hew down their sacred poles, and burn their idols with fire. No Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted to the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of their descendants shall be admitted to the assembly of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. Yet the Lord your God refused to heed Balaam. The Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loved you. You shall never promote their welfare or their prosperity as long as you live. So that seems pretty clear in a way. Any dealings with the Moabites should be ones of aggression, really, and of destruction and of negativity. Certainly not to go and settle there. So maybe we're supposed to see this as sort of ironic that the Elimelech, whose name is God is King, has in fact put no trust in him, perhaps. Or perhaps these are well-to-do people. They are Ephrathites, sort of a distinguished family group, and they can afford to go wandering off when everyone else has to stay put during the famine. Maybe the intention is not to stay too long or just to stay until things are better. Perhaps it is a selfish act. But either way, it could be interpreted that it is an act that will surely result in God's judgment and punishment. So, there are the questions that we will want to ask ourselves, and that I think are important, is why did they go, and not others? And why did they go to Moab in particular? Is it just proximity? Is it just the closest place? Is this a literary device? Is this, I talked last week about a lot of opposites, almost pitching those two opposites against each other, Israel and Moab, and switching the plenty and the full. Okay, so let's move on from that. So it says in the text that Naomi was left with her two sons. That means she was left in life with her two sons. They must have been there a little while because they took Moabite wives, and there was no children yet, and yet we are told they were there for 10 years. So chances are it was probably some time before they got married. That the 10 years is probably the total amount of time they were there. So they may have only got married towards the end, as I said slightly jokingly in the Bible study session, that if I had two sons called Weak and Sick, I might struggle to marry them off as well within a 10-year period. So Weak and Sick, Marlon and Killian also die. Not really a surprise there. So the woman was left again. She was left without her two sons or her husband. This very much speaks of a society in which family units are incredibly important. It's where you find your security and your strength. And particularly women are vulnerable outside those family units. A widow is vulnerable. We see throughout the Old Testament widows placed alongside orphans and aliens as the very bottom of the pile, people that need a bit of extra help, that should be pitied and helped and protected often by the law in some way. So she's left without her two sons or her husband. Going right back to the beginning of this session, when we talked about the prepositions, I suppose we might say that by the end of this paragraph, she has been left bereft of the things that which would normally define her in a patriarchal society. She's on her own. So now I'm going to read the next bit, verse 6 onwards. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had had consideration for his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her two daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So there's an awful lot in this to think about. she started to return from the country of Moab. She started to return with her daughters-in-law, so they're very much all together. And because she heard that the Lord had consideration for his people and given them food. Right. So Moab was only ever going to be a sort of a temporary affair for her, surely. She'd rather be in Bethlehem if it has abundance there. But also, clearly, it's her belief that it is the Lord that has given the people food. So therefore, the question for us is was it then the Lord that took the food away in the first place? If we believe in a God that gives the harvest in abundance, then is it not the Lord that takes as well? So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her daughters-in-law, and they went on their way. It all feels quite quick. I don't know if that's supposed to help us with a sense that they have very little in terms of possessions or money or anything else. But certainly there's no problem in upping and moving. There's nothing left for them there, it would seem, or certainly not for Naomi. But Naomi does say, go back to your mother's house. That's probably very unusual and possibly ties in with the idea that this is a real female-centric sort of a book. I don't think we can quite say feminist because I don't think they know what that meant. But it's certainly female-centric. And, it is possible that you would talk about going back to the mother's house if in a polygamous society you had many wives and therefore sort of one father, then it may be that you return to her house. But I think it seems to me too neat that it isn't. A little bit of a clue that we're really recanting the women's story. And she says a prayer of blessing. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So there's a really important word that we need to know about in this. I'm not an expert on the Hebrew at all, but I have read that the word to deal kindly with you, the word that's actually being translated is Hesed. She asked God for Hesed for them because the daughters-in-law had shown Hesed to the dead and to me. Hesed means something like sort of loyalty and compassion. And it's a really important word because it is one of the features of God, that God shows Hesed, loyalty and compassion, through his covenant and through God's actions. So Ruth's loyalty and Orpah's at this stage sort of remind Naomi to have Hesed, and they remind us, the reader, of God's covenantal love. Then she says, we have a lovely, beautiful scene here, a real sort of sorority scene. This is very touching, and it's very sort of personal and intimate and quite unusual, I think. You don't get many moments quite like this in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, where we really get an insight into how close these women are to each other. They really, at first, they cling to each other. And then we have to think about the levirate marriage, which we talked about in the last session. Levirate marriage essentially being that if the husband dies, then the brother will have a union with the widow, and preferably have a child, and the first child will be essentially the child of the deceased husband. You do them honour in that way, but also I suppose it gives some protection to the widow, who otherwise would be sort of outside of family structure. And she's referring to this, Naomi, when she's talking about, I've got nothing to offer you. I'm too old to give birth to sons. I haven't got any other sons, so we can't do that sort of levirate marriage thing. Even if I was to, by some miracle, have a child, you'd have to wait an awful long time for them to grow up to be old enough to marry you, and in the meantime, surely you'd want to marry someone else. No, there's nothing I could have to offer you now. I guess because of my love for you, you should go back. You should return to your homes and try a different kind of a life, and I will be left in my bitterness and sorrow because the Lord has turned against me. But Ruth clung to her. So we go on. Verse 15. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So essentially, Ruth has made a solemn oath before God. And it would almost be blasphemy, really, for Naomi to push any harder for her to go home at this point. She's made the oath. It would be wrong to do that. But there remains much reason for not going with Naomi. They certainly would be unlikely to be able to marry in Israel because they're Moabite women, and they would only be able to share in her poverty. She's appealed 3 times to the women. Ruth and Orpah's responses are quite different. Let's look again at the names. Ruth means friend, or possibly abundant in water. It's certainly a positive thing. And Orpah, we're not so sure. Something to do with the neck or the nape of the neck. Traditionally speaking, Orpah becomes, not quite the baddie, but the bad example, and Ruth the good one. Ruth clings, Orpah leaves, but it's not really fair to categorise them in that way at all. It was fairly extraordinary what Ruth was choosing to do. Orpah was really doing the sensible thing, and besides, it's quite clear that she loves Naomi too, and it takes some persuading to get her to go back. But traditionally, commentators have said that her name Orpah must be to do with her being stiff-necked or turning her neck. But alternatively, it could also be to do with beauty, the neck being a particular feature that people thought of when they thought of beauty in the ancient world, mentioned in the Song of Solomon. Thy neck is like a tower of David, that sort of thing. Another way of looking at it is that one wished to become a wife again, the other wished to remain a daughter. So these are different choices, but both equally valid. I think we might say that what Orpah does is expected, and what Ruth does is extraordinary. There has been much debate about why Ruth chooses what she does, and in fact, indeed, what the whole book means. There's been some psychological stuff done, or sort of whether Ruth is making a sort of a transition into a greater maturity of thinking, and that in some way Naomi becomes her transitional object. I'm sure that could be discussed for many an hour, and come up with some pretty interesting and possibly fruitful stuff. Let's just focus for a second on Ruth's words themselves, which are wonderful, wonderful words, often used at weddings. Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus, and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. It's a declaration not simply of sort of sticking by someone, but of inhabiting their entire life, stepping into it. It's massively sort of self-sacrificial, taking on everything, including her God, which is extraordinary, particularly given that sort of Naomi at the same time is feeling that God has given her a hard time, and so weirdly it's almost like Ruth is the one with the faith, and while Naomi's struggling a little. But either way, it's the first time Ruth invokes Yahweh, the God that we believe in, rather than the gods of Moab. And that in invoking God and almost swearing an oath by God, it shows that she's taken God truly as her own. Ruth is determined not even to let death separate them. Right, and so we carry on, starting at verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So when they returned to Bethlehem, they caused quite a stir. People are really interested in Naomi's return. Interestingly, not in Ruth at the moment. Ruth seems to be a little bit missing from this bit. Maybe this is because Naomi is a person of some standing, as we said, an Ephrathite at the beginning. But they seem pleased to see her. They doubt it's her at first, maybe because it's been so long, or because she's changed so much. Maybe all this hardship has changed her very appearance. And she says to them, "Don't call me Naomi," which means sort of pleasant and lovely. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. And she obviously feels that this is God's doing, that God has dealt bitterly with her. So again, asking that question, well then in that case, it must be God that provides abundantly. At least she's consistent, Ruth, it would seem. "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So she went away full from a place that was empty, and then she came back empty from a place that was full. And, of course, if I was standing there as Ruth, I'd be mildly offended, I think, as well. She hasn't come back entirely empty. She's come back with an incredibly loyal and doting daughter-in-law who needn't have come at all. There was just a couple of other things I wanted to mention here. One is the constant use of the word return throughout the whole story, but we've already seen it several times. The word in the Hebrew is sub, constantly about returning, turning back. We might return to that later on, that subject. The other is really unusual use of the name of God in verse 1, 20-21. Naomi calls God El Shaddai. And that's either a very old-fashioned way of talking to God, but interestingly, Shaddai comes from sad, which means breast. So El Shaddai is potentially the breasted one, so a depiction of God as sort of motherly and certainly as nurturing, protective and feeding and those sorts of things. So I think we will go on to the next section. So we're on now verse 22. We're nearly at the end. So Naomi returned, together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Right. Well, we are reminded again that Ruth is a Moabite, and we will keep on being reminded. So it is really important to the story. It's not incidental. It's not going to go unnoticed. It's not a simple thing. She is a Moabite, and we might find that particularly surprising, given that she just swore to take on the God of Naomi to become a follower of Yahweh and to make a declaration in the name of Yahweh, in the name of God, and yet we are reminded she's a Moabite. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So, either way, it evokes a beautiful picture, certainly, that the countryside is all sort of green and ripe and things are growing and all that sort of thing. But also, I think symbolically, this bodes well. This is a time of fertility, fecundity, gathering in, growth, development, goodness, wholesomeness, and fullness beginning again. So, it's we would expect good things at this point. Perhaps it's a hint that God's compassion will now extend towards them. We were told that Naomi heard that God had, as it were, visited the earth and blessed the people again. Maybe this is a clear sign that everything is about to be harvested now. The things to really think over in this chapter are who makes most of the significant decisions, who's in control, and how does that control change. We might want to consider the questions of femininity and gender. Is it fair to say that the female happiness, which we're expecting to be defined by male concerns, that continues or that changes as we go on? Or is this, in fact, a very empowering sort of a story? We'll be surprised to read that this young woman, we often don't even get the names of the young women in some of the stories, this young woman, Ruth, she does what she wants to do with her life. She makes the decision. The one last thing is that in Genesis, almost always when women are presented in pairs, conflict arises. Think of Sarai and Hagar, Rachel and Leah. This is a shock to the system. How is this new relationship going to be more beneficial, this sorority? And where is God in all of this chapter? Where do people think God is, and where is God? Will Ruth ever be accepted into Israel while she is the Moabite woman? Well, thank you so much for listening to this session. I think there'll probably be another 3 more. I will put a little list at the end of the video of sources, authors of sources that I have read that have helped to inform some of the things I've talked about. Thanks so much. Bye now. Bye.